name is Jason Grant. I'm a professor at Virginia Tech. I'll present last. This session is titled Empirical Trade Policy and Application. We have 7 excellent papers to run through. Sanctions, fund value estimation, farm to farm, corn production, trade, corn market, quality management, and fertilizer trade, agricultural trade costs, global perspective, as well as we have 7. Normally we have 8 papers. In the lightning session, we have 7. So let's shoot for 8 to 9 minutes instead of the hard 7-minute deadline per paper. I will try and remind you we have 2 minutes left, and then time's up. We'll have about 2 minutes. So keep your clarification questions. Application clarification will be a couple of minutes. Clarification questions, and then we'll do about 15 or so at the end. More standard questions. With that, our first presenter is Jeff Luxted, and Jeff, I'll let you introduce your affiliation.
Yeah, so this paper is on economic sanctions and ag trade. My co-authors are Mario Larch and Yoto Yotov. Since this is empirical trade, I guess if you've done any gravity, you probably familiar. Pretty prominent in the empirical trade literature. Okay, so sanctions have been used as a policy tool for 2,000 years, but kind of sanctions in the way that we think about them today really started at the end of the Cold War. So this is around 1990. And these are really used as an alternative to military action to try to coerce governments into doing something you want or to get them to not do something that you want. And typically during this 1990s era, this was a complete suspension of normal relations with foreign countries, trying to punish them for doing something. And it usually involved complete suspension of all bilateral trade with that particular country. So some issues with banning all trade, the primary ones are pretty ethical, banning food and medicine from countries. The objective is to punish the leaders of the country, but you end up punishing the population by creating a lot of food prices. There's a fairly big literature on how effective this is. Does this actually coerce governments from stopping what you don't want them to do? And general answer is not really. They're not really that effective. And then at the same time, the US, this really came out of the US, agri-food companies didn't like the limitation of their exports to foreign countries. So there's a lot of lobbying efforts from US firms' perspective to get rid of these kind of comprehensive sanctions. So around 2000, there's a big switch from these complete sanctions to partial sanctions and much more targeted sanctions. So how do sanctions impact trade? Well, an obvious thing is they might just completely stop a particular product from entering a country. That's the most direct effect. But there are some indirect effects that we can think about. Even if the particular product itself is not sanctioned, it can increase trade costs and insurance costs for all products going to a country. It can disrupt trade patterns. So thinking about the sending country, if they're sending fewer products abroad, that could increase supply domestically and lower price. This could lead to more domestic distribution or trade substitution to non-sanctioned countries. From the targeted country's perspective, there's going to be fewer products entering the country, so that could lead to prices going up. But then there's this kind of literature of sanction busters. Those countries that aren't involved in the sanction are just going to displace the countries that are, and they're going to just replace higher prices. It's going to just replace the countries that are not selling to that particular region anymore. Okay, so the objectives of this paper is to kind of quantify the impact of trade sanctions on agricultural trade. And we're going to look at heterogeneous impacts across types of sanctions, directions, and then various subsectors. The hypothesis is kind of that we expect sanctions to impede trade, but not completely. And this is because there's a lot of trade diversion from non-sanctioned countries that can replace the sanctioned countries. So from a policy perspective, this is really the first paper to look at the impact of sanctions in a comprehensive manner on agricultural trade. There's a couple of papers that have looked at sanctions in kind of a comprehensive analysis of sanctions in mining and then kind of aggregate trade in general. But this paper is focusing kind of on the agricultural and food trade sectors. Okay, so we come at this from a very fairly standard structural gravity perspective, but we make sure that our structural gravity is as consistent with the underlying theoretical models as possible. So we have export time, product fixed effects, import time, product fixed effects, and those are going to control for the inward and outward multilateral resistance at the product level. We have country pair fixed effects at the product level, and order effects control for any globalization. And then we have RTAs, WTOs, and then the variable trade sanctions, and then all other non-trade sanctions kind of aggregate into one particular variable. So it's a fairly standard structural gravity, but it's as consistent as we can get with underlying theory. Data sources, so we're going to use the ITPPE data source. So right now, with the results that we have are for 2000, 2016. For so that's 17 years, large number of countries, and 26 agricultural sectors. But this data set was just updated and working on updating all the results. So the years are going to go back to 86 and up to 2019. So one thing we'll be able to do is really look at that kind of break at 2000 between the sanctions decade and after that. So that's one thing that expanded data set will allow us to do. Then we have the global sanctions database, and that's going to break down sanctions by trade, finance, arms, military travel, and others. So we're going to focus on trade and love everything else in one variable. It's going to allow for us to distinguish between partial and complete sanctions, direction of trade, but we don't have sectoral indicators in this data set. So that's one potential limitation. Okay, so this is about 3 tables condensed into one. These are our main results. So if we look at average across all sectors, all sanctions, we see that sanctions do reduce trade, and they reduce trade by about 10%. So the tariff equivalent, 3.7%. So if we just focus on the complete sanctions, we see a much larger effect on trade, so around 73% or 7%. If we just focus on partial sanctions, it's a little bit less. So a tariff equivalent about 3%. So if we focus on sanctions that are on both imports and exports, then we see a fairly large 23% drop or 10%. Tariff equivalent. If we focus on sanctions that are only exports, we see a positive sign. That doesn't concern us too much. This may be not particularly meaningful because the number of observations on only sanctions that are exports is very low, so that's probably actually quite spurious itself. Maybe it's not worth reporting. And then on imports, no statistical evidence of an effect. So then we go on and we look at a case study where we look at the sanctions with Russia over the 2014 annex of the Crimea Peninsula. Here we kind of aggregate the products into what we call labor-intensive, processed food. These are the largest effects that we saw. So labor-intensive, we saw a 72% decline. Processed food was 36. If we look at just the sanctions between Russia and EU, it was pretty much a decline across the board on all agricultural products. But if we look at the Russian and sanctions with non-EU countries, we actually see some quite heterogeneous results. So they actually increased trade of both comparable food products, or saw a decline in labor-intensive processed food and sugars. So there's a lot more opportunities for sanctions busting with non-EU countries. So that's a very short summary of what we did. Perfect.
some quick questions, a little more discussion at the end.
They're not as strong as the trade sanctions. The trade sanctions definitely are. I don't remember. They were not. That's fair. The data set does not make that mistake. I don't know if the representation of that
Carve out feed, fertilizer. These sanctions are powerful and carve out. Food is not correct. So it's a lot of those indirect effects. Yeah. So yeah, most of the sanctions in this data set are partial, and they will exclude food. And we're looking at the impact of food. So it's mostly indirect. Thank you, Jack. Excellent. All right. Next, I'd like to
I don't know which one's first.
I have a horrible title. Okay, very good. Oh, God. Thank you. I should share, right? No? Oh, no. I'm sorry. So, hello everyone, I'm Monda, presenting the joint project with my advisor, Dr. Sunil and Dr. Lexus, and our paper is with only 1 minute. Quantile effects of non-tariff measures, trade agreements, and friction variables on bilateral daily trade flows via distribution regression. So the main motivation of our project comes from the Poisson estimator, which is the workforce model and the trade indicator. I'm sure most of you know that it has lots of advantages to consistent estimates when there's a heteroscedasticity of the data, and also we are able to include our zeros into the model. And as you know, our trade data has lots of zeros, which unfortunately cannot be removed from the data set. However, there's a one-time issue which we wanted to do. When the inputs of international trade can be different across the outcomes of the distribution. For example, developed and developing countries can have different support systems for their different industries. And also, I have one example here. The European Union is very strict about food safety standards, while my country, Georgia, we almost have none. So unfortunately, we cannot be able to address this heterogeneity that exists into trade data between countries. That is why our research question is to see if, to answer the question if quantile analysis gives us any additional insights on heterogeneity of the trade flows. Our objective is to estimate structural gravity model using distribution regression to examine the quantile effects of non-tariff measures, free trade agreement, friction variables. Our contribution into the literature is that, to the best of our knowledge, and I will in my best, there is no study that in agricultural economics that looks at distribution regression, and none of the study addresses quantile estimation in the trade industry, agricultural trade product industry, and there are no studies that look at estimation of quantile NCM traded dimension variables. So for our model, we will be using two models. We'll be using our base model and distribution regression by Januskov and others as our main equation. To the left side of both of the equations, you will see bilateral trade flows. X is our vector variables, non-tariff measures, FTAs and friction variables. So let me define what I mean by friction variables. So we include distance, languages, quality, and between the two countries, exported and imported countries. And we also include two fixed effects, imported and exported fixed effects, to control our multilateral business network. And so now you may ask why this so, and why not quantification? So unfortunately, right now in the literature, there is no theoretical model, theoretical definition of quantification that looks into the more than one fixed effect. However, distribution regression has already proven that it is able to deal with two types of fixed effects. So as you know, we have thousands and thousands of fixed effects, and sometimes it is very difficult for the models to deal with all these fixed effects. And another big advantage of this distribution regression is that our data is very heavily tailed to the left side because we have and lots of values between 0 and 1, and it is proven that distribution regression is the best model to deal with those type of issues. For our data set, so we have 3 years, because as I mentioned, we have only two types of fixed effects. So we only have imported and exported fixed effects, and we fix our years, and we are looking at separately. So we have 2000, 2008, and 2016. So in the beginning of sample size, at the end of the sample size, and in the beginning, the middle, and at the end. We have 119 exported and 163 imported countries. Our trade flow comes from ITPDE dataset, FTAs and frictional variables from dynamic gravity dataset, and we collected non-tariff measures from the WTO portal. So for the non-tariff measures, we aggregated 5 types of non-tariff measures: sanitary fees, sanitary technical barriers to trade, special safeguards, and import licensing. And all these non-tariff measures are already enforced by the WTO member countries in each year. And here I would like to present our preliminary results. We are still working, and we are still doing lots of things. However, this is what we have as of now, and because of time limitation, our numbers that 2016, 2008, and 2001, they have very similar trends. So this can be applied to the other years as well. So here in this table, we have EPML results, and these are distribution regression. So if you look at the EPML, we can see that we are only able to consider just 1 point. So for example, for the non-tariff measures, the coefficient estimated to just take a 0.423. However, if we look at the distribution regression, we can see that so we can see quite a variation there. So in the beginning, also in the we can see stronger effects of non-tariff measures, and then it gets less negative at the end of the quantile. So the way how now we are trying to interpret this the non-tariff measures can be very, strongly affect developing countries, which are the lower quintile, because, for example, in the dairy industry, they have to change a lot, they have to adopt new technology, they have to invest a lot, and that's why it can have a stronger negative effect, while in the developing countries, they are more established, they have to make a really small changes. And so they also have variation in other variables. So you might ask me if they are statistically different from each other. I have not yet done like formal tests. However, I tried and for money I calculated things, and what I saw is the coefficient estimated the lower quantile and upper quantile, they are definitely statistically different from each other. So we can see that there is a really important insights compared to the given estimation that estimates only averages. And also, some of you might have questioned that what about heterogeneity, which definitely exists in our model. We are working on that. We are now deriving distribution regression using instrumental variables, and hopefully soon we will understand too. And we will also look into the different non-tariff measures separately and different countries to make our paper stronger. So that was all. Thank you so much. Yes. So, for example, in 2016, non-tariff are all the non-tariff that exist. Yes, so wherever they are in 90, whatever in the
Why not put it in this cross section?
So that's part of it. So that's why you just have to wait. One time you should not be able to have to. It's very strong. Yeah.
Oh, there's that relay. You throw out distance and it absorbs it. But FTAs and some NTMs are very initial natural fire from the country.
Yes, I didn't actually see that time, but there's a paper 2021, I journal international trade by the Indian trainer. So they say that the way to fix that you have to it's a harmful problem. So they fix the facts and they are suggesting that however, distribution is over that bias comes from problem. So I don't know, there are like oh no. That was for you. Yeah, that's not for me. If I start talking about Russia, I will be very biased, so I better say nothing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to jump right in because I don't have a lot of time. So just to set the stage and sort of fix ideas on the context that I'm going to think about, I'm going to think about the context of Mexico. And importantly, Mexico is going to feature both highly productive export-oriented agriculture, but it's also going to feature subsistence farming. And so I want you to, just to start, to consider a case study. And I want you to think about the avocado, which is Mexico's largest export in terms of agriculture. And in terms of domestic production, maize is the only crop that's higher in terms of production value than the avocado. But avocado production is far more concentrated than maize, and furthermore, that's sort of increased over time. And so a possible explanation for why the avocado is so concentrated in Mexico is that it's transformed for a crop basically only grown for domestic consumption in the 1980s to one that's over half of avocados are now exported in current day. And so if you just look at the geography of avocado production, from 1950, it goes from dispersed and mostly grown for domestic consumption. And over time, you gradually see more and more concentration, particularly in the southwest of Mexico in the states of Michoacan and Jalisco. And so what I'm going to argue in this paper is I'm going to argue that there's fixed cost in particularly agricultural value chain-based production, as well as exporting, that are going to lead to some of these patterns that we see of concentration, and particularly in avocados, but also in other high value, particularly specialty crops. And so some of these fixed costs that I'm going to talk about operate at the firm level, where either processors or agro-exporters need to build specialized facilities that sort of fulfill various phytosanitary requirements, similar to sort of these non-tariff measures that we were talking about earlier. But other fixed costs operate at the regional level. And so in particular in avocados, in order to export an avocado to the US, you need a municipality needs to apply for export clearance. And that involves fulfilling a number of requirements. And so for avocados, for instance, entry costs at the regional level have kept all but one and more recently 2 states from exporting. But I argue in the paper that being in one of these states isn't enough. You really need to be close to an agricultural value chain. And so avocados, they might be the most restrictive sort of special example, but other high value crops, specialty crops that Mexico produces, have similar large fixed costs and similar patterns of concentration. So you can think of mangoes, oranges, berries, other sort of specialty crops that Mexico produces that have similar features. So to zoom out a little bit and to think sort of more broadly about high value agricultural production in Mexico and agricultural production at large, I'm going to take a series of questions that I'm going to examine in this project. I'm going to go through them one by one. So the first question I'm going to ask is, where do these agricultural value chains and agricultural exporters locate? And the first point I'm going to make is that I'm going to argue that a lot of these clusters of agricultural production don't really appear to be only located on the basis of where is suitable for production. And so for instance, here, I'm plotting, I make clusters of agricultural production, and I rank them according to their size. And then I also rank them according to their suitability. I find a positive but fairly low slope and not a very large R squared. So it doesn't seem like suitability is the only factor that's explaining where I find these clusters happening, say of avocados. The second question I'm going to ask is, I'm going to ask, what are the upstream effects of agricultural value chains and exporters on the farmers and the regions that they operate? And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a horse race between agricultural value chain presence and then agricultural suitability. And in that horse race, I'm going to find that in terms of thinking about how much a region is producing a crop, agricultural value chain presence is 9 times more important than agricultural suitability. And furthermore, this has sort of the effects that you would expect across space, where being located closer to an agricultural value chain means your area is more likely to specialize in that crop, and it sort of diminishes as you get further away. And so I can produce these facts based on census data to show that really most farms that are contracting with these value chains are quite close. Next, I'm going to consider an event study where I examine the entry of the first agro-processor to a region. So this is sort of a natural event study where the sort of randomness comes from when you get export approval. And agro-processors on average increase the share of land or sort of arable land that's in their area dedicated to the crop that they're producing by 26 percentage points, which is really large. And so suggesting they're really creating a monoculture in the areas they do. After 15 years, that effect is even larger, and it goes to 50 percentage points. So they really have huge effects on the spatial concentration of crop production in the areas that they locate in. The next is based on sort of these stylized facts, I'm going to develop a general equilibrium model with trade between Mexico and the US. And so it's going to be similar to other measures, other models in the ag trade literature. But what my contribution is going to be introducing discrete intermediaries that operate in a given crop, and then they're going to have potentially large fixed costs of entry. And what my model is going to feature is it's going to feature two separate production regimes. One is sort of autarkic, where you're only producing for domestic and local consumption. And then the other one is moving towards this model where you're supplying to agricultural value chains, and those can sell either in sort of domestic centers of demand, think Mexico City in Mexico, or abroad, and particularly to the US in this case. And then farmers are going to choose whether to sell locally or to agricultural value chains, but they have to use a slightly different input mix, particularly things like more fertilizer if they want to sell the agricultural value chains. And crop production, because this is a trade sort of model, it features constant returns to scale at the crop level, but there's sort of free shade distributed land productivities which generate nice land shares. And so I can show that my model sort of matches the stylized fact that I showed you earlier, that it's not only crop suitability which is driving the presence of these clusters. So my model incorporates a lot of these factors such as market access, which may explain why these clusters aren't located in the most suitable areas. Next, since I go through all this effort to build a model, I can use my model to then derive estimates that I think are very interesting, namely the sort of fixed cost of entry for these agricultural value chains. And you can think of these as the fixed costs at both the sort of farm and sort of regional level. So this is sort of incorporating sort of more generally a fixed cost, which isn't necessarily what one actor is paying. And so my model is going to provide some guidance and estimation of, in absence of having any information on which firms, what their sort of hypothetical operating profits would be if they don't enter. So I can see that this allows me to generate fixed cost estimates that are larger for crops that have, say, higher phytosanitary requirements, such as avocados, and lower for more stable crops, such as maize. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do sort of a counterfactual policy analysis using my model. And the main counterfactual that I'm going to consider is understanding the role that these agricultural value chains may play in limiting crop switching due to climate change. The idea being that crop switching in papers such as Custom, Johnson, and Smith have been shown to have a large impact on mitigating these damages due to climate change. And under, say, for instance, RCP 4.5 simulation, I find a model where I have these fixed costs of entry for intermediaries in the supply chains, limits crop switching under these projections by 27% relative to a model without fixed costs. And there's, because these intermediaries have market power in sourcing, they're sort of so concentrated, I find that even with climate shocks, there's sort of a muted exit response of these intermediaries, particularly because a lot of the intermediaries that I see in my model have high operating profits, but also in the data, have high operating profits that are going to shelter them from reductions in the sort of regional crop suitability of that area. So you're not going to see a whole lot of exit as predicted by my model. And so I just wanted to show a map showing that, thank you, show a map showing that because climate change is expected to affect the shift regional productivities, for instance, I'm showing maize suitability here, where colors in blue indicate that an area is becoming more productive, and in red it is showing that an area is becoming less productive. These, of course, have implications for cross-border trade, particularly between the US and Mexico. And then, of course, given that these firms are sort of discrete agents who are doing all this exporting, it's important to take them into account when thinking about, under climate change, where we're going to see agricultural production in the future. So I'm surprised that I actually ended early, but thank you so much. Sorry to go through everything so quickly, but please visit my site soon to see my paper, and thanks so much.
Is there, are we looking
what is export, like, what is an exporter like in this case, right? What kinds of.
Yeah, so in my model, I'm not accounting for whether or not an exporter could shift into another crop. That's sort of an interesting dimension to explore that I think about. In sort of the data, about 50% of these agro-exporters are single crop, and then the other 50% have multi-crops. So sort of depends on the crop. But yeah, that could be an interesting dimension to see in shifting. The one thing I'll say is that particularly in some of these high value crops, it is quite special. So it's maybe you already have a building, you might have grow it's sort of unclear whether or not, like, how much that stage is. Yeah, excellent.
Seems like some of the assistance to switching your traditional form of power. Seems like it could also be a bit back to this. I know.
Oh, sure.
Exploded $2 to $3 billion per year in the US market. I'm going to have to show a systems approach to investors. Demonstrating buffers, demonstrating that wasn't just a single 5%.
Right.
It's a massive systems approach. And then they got the market, they got checked off, they got access to it. I'm wondering if there's that significance of that type of investment and getting its approval is more of an explanatory, maybe not so much the market power of the exporter, but the producers and the exporters saying, hey, food has to apply.
Yeah, totally. So I think, to be clear, these fixed costs are also deterring entry. So you don't see as much entry in these alternative areas because of the fixed costs. So I have both those things happening at the same time in the model. You don't see as much exit, but you also don't see as much entry because these fixed costs, as you said, the whole system needs to sort of go up, and that's tough. And so that's precisely why I say that these fixed costs are not just at the firm level, but also at the regional level. If every farm needs to be inspected semi-annually and have a USDA inspector nearby, these are sort of fixed costs that aren't necessarily reflected in a firm balance sheet, but are, of course, incredibly important. All right, thank you.
Our next speaker is estimating the effects of rising international crop production in the U.S. and global corn markets.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Saroj Adhikari from University of Idaho. Today, I'm going to present our research estimating the effects of rising international corn production and trade on US and global corn market. This research was partially funded by USDA, and the conclusion and finding doesn't represent any USDA policy. So let's begin our presentation. Moving into introduction, we know that world is going through some interesting changes in corn industry, and one of those changes is increasing production in countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Ukraine. For instance, in case of Brazil, the planting of winter corn, and Ukraine has easy market accessibility to nearby Asian, European, and African markets. So they are some of the reasons for increasing corn production. And as a result, the global export from these emerging countries is increasing, whereas the share of traditional powerhouse like United States is decreasing. For instance, in 1920 only, these three countries exported more than 55% of global corn export, whereas US exported less than 30%. So you can see the trend in that graph as well. So, so now the question arises like how the world is interacting in the corn market. So the latest research by Arnett and Hoffman in 2019 shows that level of corn production and export influences the country's participation in price discovery process, but there are not much research in this topic about the interaction between countries in the global market. So this leads to our research question that how are the countries interacting in the corn market? What is the role of United States and the new emerging corn producing countries in the global market? So are there any changes between and after the rise of these emerging corn producing countries? And how about the shocks in these countries affecting the price movements in US and other countries? So we are going to find out the answer of this question in our paper. So we have used global vector autoregression model, and this model is particularly useful in analyzing the dynamics when the multiple countries are involved or in a complex system. So the first step in this model is to estimate the country specific vector autoregression model with exogenous variable. We call it bar X model in short. And in the second step, we combine this bar X model with the link matrix to build a global model. So we have used con export weight as a for the construction of link matrix. And in order to access the result of our GVAR result, we have used generalized impulse response function, GIRFs. So talking about the data, we have used monthly data from 2000 to 2021 for 5 major corn exporting countries in the world, US, Brazil, Argentina, Ukraine, and EU. The indigenous variable used in our model are corn export price, ending stocks, production, exchange rate, fertilizer prices, consumer price index for each country or region. And we have used oil price as global or exogenous variable. Similarly, we have also used a rest of world model to account the effect of other remaining players. So let's talk about the results. We evaluate one positive standard deviation shock to on different variables that we use in our model, and we see the response on corn export prices. We compare the results before and after 2011 to see if there are any changes before and after the rise of emerging corn producing countries. These are some of the major findings we found in our result. We see the significant effect of shock to corn production in emerging countries, especially after 2011, and they were non-significant before. Similarly, a positive shock to export price in one country or region affects other countries or region more significantly after 2011. And the changes in exchange rates have larger impact in export prices after 2011 compared to prior. So you can see in this graph that these are the impulse response function, and this graph shows how export price would respond over time when a positive standard deviation shock is given to corn production in Argentina. The x-axis represents months, and we can say these graphs, the shaded portion or the colored portion represents confidence interval, and we can say the graphs are significant if the red line or the zero lies outside of the confidence interval. So we can say the graphs before 2011 or from 2000 to 2010, they are mostly non-significant, and the graphs are significant after 2011. So which also shows that export prices in EU and US responds negatively to corn production in Argentina significantly after 2011. Similarly, this graph shows a similar kind of response, and this is a shock to corn production in Brazil, and you can see the response in export price response in EU and US. So they are mostly non-significant before 2011, but they are significant after 2011. This is the impulse response function graph showing a shock to corn production in Ukraine. Although the graphs after 2011 are not distinctly significant, but the export price response are still informative and following the similar trend that of Argentina and Brazil. This is the graph showing shock to export price in US, and you can see. I think you can see that although there is less magnitude between two graphs, so the response is little bit less than that of before 2011. You can see the response is little bit less compared to 2011, and this was that the US is playing little bit less dominant role than that of before, and you can also see that US is responding less to its own shock after 2011 than compared to before, although the magnitude is very less. So this leads to our conclusion that the rising international competition in corn production is challenging the dominant role that US are used to play, and various shocks of demand and supply in emerging corn producing countries have affected the corn price in US and other countries or region. Similarly, our results are most significant after 2011, suggesting that there is increased role of new emerging corn producing countries in world corn market, and we believe that our results have important policy implication, suggesting that ignoring these new emerging corn producing countries in policy and academic research may understate the effect of supply, demand, and price shocks in oil price. So yeah, that's all.
Questions? I'll just ask one. Can you go back to your response to the chat? So some of these countries have different production seasons, right? You had monthly data, right?
Yeah.
I was wondering if the response to the shock on production in, say, Brazil or Argentina is different if you're in the, our winter in part of those years. When our corn is in season, which is in the fall, and the winter months market. So I'm wondering if that response is heterogeneous within season.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't discussed about that, but that's a good question. Yeah.
Just as a countercyclical nature of north and southern. Thank you, sir. When quality management helps agri firms export.
Good afternoon, everybody. I say yes. So I'm happy to present this paper. I worked with a co-author from France, Karina Touche. It is INRAE in Nantes. So when quality management help agri-food firms to export. So the literature on quality and trade is extensive. There is a lot of papers showing how quality is an important component of competitiveness on the international markets. But what is quality is less clear. Some papers are saying that is exporting more expensive goods, or it could be products that are differentiated by some brands, or it could be also something that is with more research and development, or with more higher expert rankings, for example, in the case of wine. So in this paper, we will deal about quality, but looking at a different aspect of the quality, that is the fact that the products are more safe and that the firm can ensure traceability of this product. Indeed, there is an increasing demand for this question of traceability and safety for food products. We can see that with the different public regulation all over the world, and also the increasing number of non-tariff measures at the border, and also the increasing use of private certification. So this paper is dealing with the impact of quality on export, looking more precisely how the commitment of firms to traceability and food safety issue impact their export performance. So how do? We use a proxy to proxy the commitment of the firm in terms of safety and traceability using the personnel in the firm that is in charge of this quality. So it will be the quality management and control personnel that are the staff in each firm that is in charge of a lot of stuff like designing quality procedure or doing inspection, also looking at the feedback from customer and globally analyze safety issues, and also, that is really important, create the quality documentation and all the system of traceability within the firm. So this will make us able to look which firms are more involved into this issue of traceability and quality. So to do that, we use data set of French administrative firm. So for each firm, we know the number of employees, the number of working hours, the salary by occupation. So we will know for each firm how many persons are employed in for a quality control. So we have two classification, manager and engineer and technician. And we merge this data with data of trade, so the French custom data. So for each firm, we will have the value and the quantity exported by destination and product. So we use data from 2009 and 2019. We restrict our sample to agri-food products and to firms that are producing agri-food products. So we exclude wholesaler or exporters, for example. So when we just have a quick look at the data, so here the distribution, the canal distribution of export at the firm, product, destination, year level. And we can see just like that, that firms that have quality personnel seems to export higher values and higher quantity. So here are the specifications. So we will look whether the export, that is at the firm F, destination J, product K, and time T, depend on whether the firm has a quality personnel or not. So it's a dummy that is varying by time and firm. We control for firm characteristics that are invariant with time and for the characteristics of the market. So we have destination, product, time, fixed effect. So we are relying, and our identification relies on the variation of firm hiring new quality management staff. And we will look at that not only on export value and quantities, but also on unit values, and to see whether there is something linked with the previous literature on quality. We estimate the quality following the Candelval methodology. So it's okay. And we also look at the export extensive margin. So a dummy whether the country is exporting or not, because here our export value are only on positive trade flows. So here are the results of our baseline. So we can see that firms that have new quality management staff increase their exports in both in value and in quantity, but have lower unit values. It doesn't seem to have any effect on the quality perceived according to the Candelval methodology, but it seems that it have impact on the extensive margin, so that it helps firms to reach new markets. So we, in a second step, we are looking more in detail, and we are looking whether the quality management personnel help firms to export to destination where there is non-tariff measures. So we use UNCTAD data on NTMs, and it appears in these first results that this effect of the quality personnel only help firms to export to destination market where there is non-tariff measures, so non-sanitary and phytosanitary measures or technical measures. We distinguish according to whether there is a European market or the non-European market. And we saw on column 4, for example, here that this effect is heterogeneous according to the kind of non-tariff measures. So as a conclusion, was this paper, that is a paper work in progress, is at the moment showing that quality management employees help firms to export more in value and quantity, but only to destination with non-tariff measures. We also show that it reduces unit values, so the products are on average at lower prices, and it doesn't impact the perceived quality according to the Candelval methodology of estimation of quality. And this effect differs according to the kind of NTM that is applied at the destination market. So in the paper, we try to explain, so we go a little bit further, but I don't have the time here to explain more, but we suppose that these results can be explained first by the fact that the quality personnel helps the firms to increase their efficiency of supply chain, because if you have somebody that is in the firm that is in charge of making documentation and looking at the different process along the chain within the firm, it will increase the efficiency as compared to firms that do not have this kind of personnel. It also helps the firm to face NTM, so could help firms to have a better compliance with regulatory requirements abroad, because you will have in the firm somebody that is that can have information, understand the non-tariff measures abroad, will be able to fulfill the documentation, etc., and to answer to these different requirements. And also, the third channel that we identified is the fact that quality personnel can also increase the reputation of the firm, because firms that do not have, that have this kind of management personnel in charge of quality of products will have less hazard recalls, complaints, etc. And finally, we'll also have more ability to have certification, because they will have people in the firms that is in charge of documentation, traceability, and this is important to have certification. So that is what we are doing now, looking whether this firm have more certification than the other to see whether this channel is really the more important or not. For example, if firms that have quality personnel are more able to have certification asked by retail companies that as the IFS certification, for example. So this is a work in progress, so I will be happy to have your comments. Thank you. Yes?
I wanted to ask a little bit about to me, when I think about the requirements of digital paper, like it seems like this kind of ability requires to export, like to have this sort of whether or not you're able to. Some of this is you hire more budgetary black employees so that you can export these markets. But and I think your unit value of those features a little bit. It seems like if it was really quality demand consumers where they have that they have preferences for this kind of high. Seems like pricing can go out. I don't think the main thing is just a quality, like quality of user drivers, consumers demand products where it does comply with the regulations in order to.
What is quality? This is the fact that consumer will be able to see products so sufficient brand or the or is it the fact that you want to have the products are more safe? So what we are saying here, that we can usually say quality is something that we can look at, but it's usually more expensive. But here it's not the case. To say it will be product that will be basic one, without safer, without quality personnel, and so on. But also more.
two-parter. So here you just have a binary. Do I have quality? Have you thought about like an enhancement?
Yeah, as I said, I have data, salary, work, so we are looking at that. We are looking for fee and data. I will find one or so we are.
And related to this question about dynamics.
Yeah.
That you have fundamental characteristics of the characteristics.
So we are working on that. The idea is also that as we are principals, in finding difference, while the technical requirements of the height. So we are not convinced that first will come to a higher level of the home, but it's more what the quality of the higher service. That's why we're not really concerned with yeah, we are looking also with
Yeah, the prices have been very, if you think about the balance and stars, I mean, all of it in order to improve the market, get into the actual market. So I think when you put it out there, it reduces these value prices.
yeah,
it's not really jive. So we think about cost.
yeah. So in fact, another now on I think the data
Not too bad on time. Presentation number 6 is from next week. Agricultural trade costs.
You? I'm sorry. It just. Oh yeah, I didn't. Thank you. Right. Hello everyone. I'm Yunus Emre Karagül'le. I will talk about agricultural trade costs in 21st century. This is a joint work with Dr. Charlotte Emlinger and Dr. Jason Grant. I would like to start by asking the question, is the world getting flatter? Referring to Friedman's flat world argument. The idea here is that globalization has made the world more connected through advanced automation, new transportation technologies, expansions of digital trade, and also new communication channels. Furthermore, liberalization of goods, services, and people, also reductions in tariff rate, has reduced the trade costs for many sectors. And this contributed to the idea that global competitive field for international trade costs has been leveled, meaning that the world is flattened. On the other hand, agricultural products differ from other sectors. Some agricultural products are perishable and cannot be stored efficiently. They also face more barriers than other sectors. Most countries prioritize their food security in general, also besides the crisis, for example, COVID-19 and also Ukraine-Russia war. For example, India, Egypt, Kosovo, Serbia just banned the wheat export this year, and this might cause prices to go up, as well as the trade cost. And lastly, the average tariff rate for agricultural products are still higher than the other sectors, And all of these might cause higher trade costs as well as different evaluation paths for agricultural products. Hence, these factors have led us to ask, how do agricultural trade costs evolve in 21st century? We also ask, is there any heterogeneity within the evaluation as well as the direction of trade? And to answer these questions, we built an original and new data set of bilateral trade costs that is directional, meaning that it is asymmetric between the partners, also disaggregated at standard international trade classification revision 1 at 4-digit level. And also it's a relative term, meaning that international trade costs relative to domestic trade. Our model consists of 3 steps. We first use structural gravity model with fixed effects and capture trade costs from origin I to destination J using country pair dummies shown here as Dij. And we capture the coefficients as trade cost coefficients shown here as alpha ij. And in the second step, we obtain elasticities for each product K. Here it's shown as beta 1. And since it's for every product, it's beta 1K. In the third step, we use elasticities and trade cost coefficients from first 2 steps to calculate ad valorem equivalent trade cost for each partner Ij, product K, and period tau, which is every 3 consecutive years in our data set. We use UN Comtrade and FAO production data for international and intranational trade flows, starting from 2001 to 2018. We also utilize from MAC maps and also gravity databases in this study. This is a kernel density distribution of our trade cost data set. Actually, it's in log form. I would like to point out that it is dense around 0.5 to 1, meaning that international trade costs are 1.5 to 2.7 times higher than the domestic trade. Also, as you could see that there are fewer trade flows for the higher trade costs in the distribution. And just to summarize, there are about 158 exporters and importers, 63 products, and almost 457K observations. And to measure how agricultural trade costs evolve through periods, we run a regression of period dummies on log of trade costs and take the first period as a reference category. And we run this for every subsector of BICO classifications. And we see that here, especially after the second period, there is an increasing trend for bulk and intermediate commodities. On the other hand, consumer-oriented and agriculture-related commodities follow a different path. And the takeaway here is that the evolution of trade costs in agriculture are heterogeneous across sector. And here we are looking for the evolution of trade costs by exporters' income level. High-income countries have experienced the highest cost reductions and followed by lower middle-income countries and upper middle-income countries. Nevertheless, they have an increasing trend, especially in the last 3-4 periods. On the other hand, low-income countries end up having higher trade costs, as well as the increasing trend at the end. And this implies that low-income countries are struggling to benefit from the globalization. And also, this might cause food insecurities and maybe some divergence for these kind of countries. In conclusion, we find that there is increasing trend in agricultural trade costs. Also, there is high heterogeneity across products, regions, income groups, and direction of trade. And also in agriculture, it's not very easy to uphold the flat world argument, considering the high trade cost, also increasing trend in the trade cost. And later in this paper, we are using standard gravity variables and non-tariff measures to explain the determinants of trade cost. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Questions, thoughts, comments?
So you showed that the goal is put in your body. From kind of this part of the result, it's fair to say that basic product those sort of full commodities that most yeah, I would expect higher process to
Most of the grapes are produced in Ukraine and Russia. Right now, that's why there is some issues about the food security in the world in general. So I guess it's not the case.
so how should I think about that?
Like, how should we think about the incentive plan?
What's yeah, I guess I'm curious
Oh, what's it to be driving that?
The low income.
Oh, the low income. I'm still working on that one, so I might not give you, very nice intuition about that one. Maybe low-income countries are not satisfying the measures that countries are putting, for example, NTMs or SPS measures, because they need to spend some money and invest so that they can export their products. That might be one reason.
The interpretation here is international trade costs relative to intra.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Yeah. That might also be the case. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Sure. I use distance in the elasticity estimation part. But here we only have fixed effects and then counter pair dummies.
Have you looked at the distance model?
Yes, I have. Like, do you mean for the elasticity estimate part, or?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what's the idea?
The idea is counter pair dummies. So there are lots of let's say dummies for each counter pair, and it is asymmetric. I read the short run gravity model for the distance puzzle, but I was not so sure if I can use it in the first part, because I basically run it on just fixed effect models. Actually, the counter pair dummies are sort of border effect.
Yeah, so Jeff works with you.
Yeah.
So it's like, RJ is, it's not one for every IJ. Right?
Yeah,
It's not I,
yeah.
J, right? But it's only one in the spirit of your it's international, right? I, J.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the identification for those comes off of the inclusion of intra.
Yes, we could also do that. It just for the moment for every 3 consecutive years, because we have tariff. Yeah. Yeah. It's because of we have tariff data for every 3 years.
One more
Tariff data comes from MAC maps. Right. Okay.
8 to 9 minutes. All right, I will try not to take too much time because we're getting towards the end of the session. Leave some time at the end for discussion. My name is Jason Grant. I'm going to talk today about the China's tariff system of tariff exclusions and market procurement waivers that underlie the Phase 1 trade agreement. And we want to ask a couple of policy questions related to this. Can we decompose some of those effects as they contributed to China's increased purchases in the Phase 1 period? And did they help reverse some of the losses when we control for the trade damage assessments that we all know were fairly sizable during the trade war years? So I'll acknowledge two of my co-authors, all of my co-authors, excuse me, but two, Xiaoping and Jingzhu from Nanjing Agricultural University, which really helped us codify and map all these underlying product exclusions, which had to be translated and then reconciled at the HS level. And then Charlotte and who you just heard present, and then Sean Arita, I'd like to thank the Office of the Chief Economist for the collaboration on this. So I'll just recap, bring us all up to speed of where we're at in this China-US relationship. I'll talk to you a little bit about the tariff exclusion programs that China initiated. I'll introduce a monthly model of bilateral trade because these were implemented in rolling quarterly basis. And then I'll show you some results and we'll conclude with some implications. So just to recap, I think all of us are fairly aware of what happened starting in 2018 when we had Section 232 and then the larger one, Section 301, after that investigation. Then we had a large retaliation response from China. If you fast forward towards the end of 2018 and into 2019, we had a trade truce period and trade tensions then again escalated in the middle of 2019, May to September. Tariffs went up a little more. And then we had some trade deal optimism. And finally, January 15th, 2020, just before COVID-19, I believe, shocked the world again. We had the economic and trade agreement between the United States and the People's Republic of China, otherwise known as Phase 1, was signed. It entered into force February 14th, 2020. And in March 2nd, China's state, and this is where not everyone is maybe as familiar, China's State Council Customs operation announced a 696 list of tariff exclusions. And these were then renewed on a rolling quarterly basis. And they've been renewed all the way through 2021, December, month 12. And now we've confirmed it for 2022 as well. So what is this? So underlying the big Phase 1 agreement, and everyone remembers the tracking and was China meeting its purchasing agreements, but underlying all that discussion was this system of market procurement and tariff exclusions. And so you can see these were intended for market-based procurement of products from the United States, and applications for the products were starting to be accepted in March of 2020. So this is just a quick flow diagram underlying the Phase 1 agreement. So it had two programs. One was just tariff exclusions. Okay, no application necessary by Chinese importing firms. And those were extended for 1 year. The second program, which was a little bit larger in product scope, was the market procurement program. And this is where firms needed to apply, importing firms in China, and if accepted, the retaliatory tariffs were waived. And those applications were good for 1 year. So you can see the products covered. Here is, if you look at the retaliation period, you total them up, we're looking at the 6-digit, even though China's customs is at 8-digit. But we've got about 4,300 products involved in retaliation. And then we move into the Phase 1 period, And you can see the different programs, the market procurement program and the tariff exclusion outright program. You can see the number of products in agriculture, manufacturing, energy, and then the uncovered product sectors, which there still were exclusions and market procurement tariff waivers, even though they weren't covered in the purchase obligations. So the trade increases that China committed to, there was still exclusion and market procurement product lines in those categories. So in total, we got about 5,000 HS6 products. And if you go ahead and then plot the average tariffs, and remember, the phase 1 agreement left tariffs in place, right? So that was one of the criticisms of the US-China phase 1 deal was it didn't touch the tariffs, they're still on. But if you include these two programs, okay, and you plot China's weighted average tariff using 2017 as weights, you get a different picture than what you see sort of commonly reported. And there's a pretty dramatic decrease in the weighted average tariff using fixed weights in 2017. When you include these tariff exclusions and market procurement program of tariff waivers. So the policy question we're interested in is, rather than tracking, did China make its purchase commitments? Did it, how far did it get? We ask a little more nuanced question is, to what extent did the phase 1 deal more generally, and in particular, China's system of tariff preferences, or tariff exclusions, excuse me, facilitate the recovery of that US-China trade relationship? All right, so we're going to set up a model that we used in our AEPP article, and I'll focus here on the gamma terms, which are what we are interested in. So we've got retaliation, all right, and we have a monthly panel from 2017, January, through 2021, December. So we'll control for the retaliation period, okay, and that's this term here, where the US shipped to a number of countries that retaliated on Section 232 and 301. Investigation. We'll then look at the phase 1 period. Okay, so think of that as the interaction of the US-China bilateral pair, right, from the trade war period. Now we're into the phase 1 period. So month greater than the year combination greater than 2020. And then we'll look at, thank you, the exclusion. What we're really interested in is the interaction, the triple interaction here with product exclusions. So the US-China dummy, the phase 1 period, and the subset of products that made the market procurement and tariff exclusion process. Okay, so the results. So to what extent did China's tariff exclusions facilitate some of the trade increases we saw in agriculture? And I'm going to say, actually, if you decompose this, so there's the retaliation effect driven off these coefficients that we estimated. And here's the phase 1 of non-excluded tariff excluded products. And here's the phase 1 effect down here at 66%. So, you can do some of the math on net. If you add up the retaliatory trade period, the losses we suffered on our exports to China, and then some of the gains on the tariff exclusion program, on net, we're about 44% ahead, the base year benchmark year being 2017. We also did this across some of the individual product sectors. No surprise, cereals and oil seeds, the tariff exclusions were really important, okay, versus some of the meat products where the non-tariff issues were more important, and the seafood was relatively little change. So I will conclude with that. Tariffs and the non-tariff measures mattered and underlie this US-China trade agreement. Okay, so the purchase commitments, they were the buzz and the talk in the media, but they alone did not reverse the export losses. It was this system of tariff waivers was, at least we found initial evidence, it was a key explanatory factor in some of the trade recovery for US products. So thank you. Questions, comments, feedback? Jing-Yang, yeah. The control group is market. Well, it's a within panel, right? And we borrow the M from the time dimension. So we're looking within IJKM. So a variety in our model is a country pair, an HS6 product, and a month, right? To take account of all those seasonal interactions that I was talking about earlier. So we're looking within country pairs. So within the US, China, for example, or within China, the EU. So all those country pairs in the model, we're looking within. Oh, yeah, sure. No, so we're not doing Yoto, Luxted, Mario Larch with the international flows because we wanted that within season. The tariff waivers are a rolling quarterly basis, so.
But you can, so I'm looking in particular at the 19th.
Yeah.
Those could be commodity specific, right?
Yes, we can make them commodity specific, yeah. Well, we just, instead of running the whole sample, which takes so long, we just said, well, let's run it for cereals. I mean, we should probably still include a K dimension in there, but just to get it to run, we stuck with the IT, the JT, and the separate KT. So that's a good observation. Any other thoughts? Chance to wrap up? Questions for other speakers? Let's thank all of our presenters today. Thank you for attending this session. Yeah, that's one question. Yeah.